Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to you all, and thank you all very much indeed for coming along here today. Before I begin my talk this afternoon, let me just say something which I hope will be helpful. Quite simply, if you have any questions at all that arise from this afternoon's talk or yesterday's talk on wildflowers, consider me always available to receive those questions, morning, afternoon or evening, or indeed if you see me out and about on shore excursions, because my way of looking at things is that I am not just here to do 45-minute talks every once in a while. Instead, I'm always available to receive your questions if you wish. If you have any immediate questions, though, that need to be answered right after this talk, I can't take them around the stage area because the technicians need to change the set. I can, though, take them outside the theatre, and I will do so immediately after this talk. But today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you an overview of Norway's amazing natural wonders. And the story I'm going to tell you this afternoon goes back an incredible 400 million years ago, back to a time that Earth scientists call the Paleozoic. And one of the fascinating things that was happening at those times, 400 million years ago, was that huge mountains were being pushed up higher and higher, but not just in the area that today we call Norway, but also right across Ireland as well, Scotland too. And as a matter of interest, the Appalachian Mountains of North America were all part of that extraordinary mountain building process. So Norway was born basically out of breathtaking forces of pressure and heat, which all served to create a truly extraordinary natural landscape. But now, because I only have 45 minutes this afternoon, I need to press the fast forward button on time and whiz to only about 11,000 years ago. But that was another essential time in the history of the natural wonders of Norway, because around that time, about 11,000 years ago, that was the end of the last ice age. And during that ice age, almost the entire land surface of Norway had been covered by a thick sheet of ice. But while that ice was slowly melting after the ice age, all sorts of massive glaciers started to carve and gouge out the fields that we have already been enjoying, haven't we? So when we think about the fascinating natural landscapes of Norway as they appear to us today, there's awe-inspiring drama at every turn, endless fascination. And those processes of landscape formation are still going on today, ladies and gentlemen, if only in a much more less dramatic fashion than immediately after the Ice Age. Because even today, right now, ladies and gentlemen, the land of Norway is actually still recovering from the end of that last ice age by tiny fractions of an inch each year. It's a process that scientists call isostatic recovery. But cruise guests often ask me, after all that ice forced down the land of Norway and pushed it down under the extraordinary weight of all that ice, how low was the land of Norway before it started to recover? That question often crops up, so let me anticipate it right now. It is a great question to think about, isn't it? The answer is that it's different around different parts of Norway, but if we think about the area around Norway's capital city of Oslo, that area actually got down to 725 feet below sea level before it started to recover. 725 feet, that's a surprise, isn't it? An area around central Norway, the city of Trondheim, that went down to 590 feet before it started to recover, simply because of the extraordinary weight of the glacier ice forcing it down before the land recovered. So as we begin our own journey of exploration into Norway's natural wonders, they are truly extraordinary and full of surprise, aren't they? So let's have a look at the result of some of that astonishing rock carving of the ice, shall we? Which is behind the creation of Norway's fjords. Now, I'm showing you on my slide Sognefjord because it just happens to be truly extraordinary, the second deepest fjord in the world. at its deepest point, 4,221 feet deep. That's a big number. How can we make sense of it? Well, it's 0.8 miles deep. We can make sense of 0.8 miles, can't we? But after that overview introduction into all the drama of the natural wonders of Norway, let us settle down and let's think about some of the details. I'm going to start in the south of Norway, and I'm going to go towards the north. So let me show you the rugged and wild landscape of the Skagerrak, which is a strait of water which runs between southern Norway and Denmark. So this is a part of Norway where we find our first fjords, as well as large glaciers such as Setesdalsheiene and Fabergstolsbreen as well. And then as we go inland into Norway, we find that the mountains change their character completely. So although they're high and wild and jagged around the coastline of Norway, they're more in the form of gentle plateaus as we get into the inland. And certainly by the time as we get to the Norwegian border with Sweden, they are really much more rounded in their form. And then as we go towards the north of Norway, of course, the mountains get changed again. And of course, in any survey of the natural wonders of Norway, I just had to include the beautiful and majestic Lyngen Alps. People often ask me how long this chain of mountains goes on for. Longer than many people assume, 55 miles. How wide is this chain of mountains? Between 9 and 12 miles. So if you're on assembling your things to do list for your next Norwegian vacation, the Lyngen Alps is a high recommendation from me. The highest point in the whole of these beautiful mountains in the Lyngen Alps is just over 6,000 feet at a peak called Jekavare. But if we go back to the south, where I was starting my talk, along the Skagerrak Strait, and we find that the land is a lot lower than it is further north, and we find that there are hundreds of islands, and there are skerries as well. Now, what are skerries, ladies and gentlemen? They are small islands, which are actually the result of a lot of cross-cutting of the land by the glaciers themselves, that I was telling you about a moment ago. But it is most definitely worth spending quite a considerable amount of time thinking about the south and central parts of Norway, because most visitors, well, certainly on their first-time vacations to Norway, mess them out, thinking that they need to go to the more northerly mountains and fjords. But actually, the southern part of Norway, ladies and gentlemen, boasts some of the finest scenery in the entire nation, and the most extraordinary habitats as well. There are forested dales, both very near to the north and west of Oslo, pointing towards the rearing peaks of the interior. And this southerly area also boasts 3 of Norway's best hiking areas. And I know on this cruise I've met many keen hikers already. So remember the names of Jotunheimen, Rondane and Dovrefjell. And if ever you find yourself driving again on a future vacation along the Norwegian E6 highway, you'll find that Otta and Kongsvoll are really good starting points for some truly amazing hiking adventures. But travelling east and north from Otta, we find the Rondane National Park, established in 1962 as Norway's first ever national park. And now it's one of the most popular hiking areas in the whole of Norway. 223 square miles in area, 1/3 of which is in the high Alpine zone, full of natural fascination. And as the soil is poor, vegetation is sparse. So the sorts of vegetation that you're likely to find there include lichens, reindeer moss, seems to be almost everywhere in that area. And views across the extraordinary landscape really are beautiful. There's patches of dwarf birch there, adding to what the guidebooks call the scenic splendour of the landscape. And wild mountain peaks divide Rondane National Park into 3 distinct areas. So to the west of the centrally located Lake Ronsvatn are the wild cirques and the jagged peaks of Storsmeden, 6,617 feet feet at its summit. Sagtinnen as well, a whisker over 6,500 feet at its summit. And Vestelmeden, the same sort of height, just a shade over 6,500 feet. But get this, there's no less than 10 mountains in just the Rondane Park alone, which are over 6,500 feet at their summit. Now, here's something interesting. The bedrock. I was being asked by a young gentleman at the back there about geology. It's endlessly fascinating, but truly complicated. The bedrock of Rondane was on a shallow seafloor created between 500 and 600 million years ago. But from what we've found so far, we've found no fossils in that area. So we think that there was actually no animal life in that part of the seabed. Until, of course, some clever PhD student comes along and proves it's all wrong. But I can just only tell you the picture that we know now. But the present Rondane landscape was formed actually mostly out of the last ice age that I was telling you about at the beginning of my talk, ending about 11,000 years ago. And at that time, huge quantities of ice were formed. And it's actually believed that the ice melted not in a single melt, no, that would be too simple, but in a shifting cycle of melting, but then less ice accumulation. And the ice melting would have been very quick when it happened at times, digging out very deep river valleys. And Rondane actually contains quite a few small canyons, which are really worth exploring, which are created by this rapid ice melting. Certainly valleys to think about, Jökulhollet and Vest-Ulla as well. But Rondane is actually one of the best places in the whole of Europe to see wild reindeer. I'm not talking about the domesticated species here, ladies and gentlemen. These are the truly wild reindeer. And the Norwegian Directorate of Nature Management really puts a great priority, rightly in my view, on the conservation of wild reindeer. And it's estimated that in the Rondane area alone, there's between 2,000 and 4,000 wild reindeer. Also a small population in the neighbouring Dovre area as well. But to protect these beautiful wild reindeer, hiking trails have been moved. Well, that just makes sense, doesn't it? And the whole of the Dovre area and Rondane was actually enlarged, again, it makes sense, in the year 2003 to allow for the potential of growth of these beautiful wild reindeer. But what else might we find in the Rondane and Dovre area? Well, roe deer are definitely worth looking out for. Elk, sometimes known as moose, of course, a very commonplace. Look out for musk ox as well in this Dovre area. Wolverines are there too. Bears are also there in the wild, ladies and gentlemen. The sad news, though, is that wolf populations, yes, they are falling. But Jotunheimen National Park, moving on now to a new national park, is one of the most beautiful parks in the whole of Norway. Again, it's often bizarrely neglected by first-time visitors, possibly because there is just so much to see and do in Norway. What does Jotunheimen actually mean? A very poetic name, the home of the giants. And certainly it's a fitting name. Over 200 mountains, ladies and gentlemen, measure over 6,200 feet at their summit. And in actual fact, two of Northern Europe's highest mountains, Galdhøpiggen, which is measured about 8,100 feet at its summit, and Glittertind, a similar height at its summit, again 8,100 feet, and also Norway's highest waterfall, 900 feet tall, ladies and gentlemen, is right there in Jotunheimen National Park. I said it was an extraordinary place to visit. But again, let's get back onto that E6 highway, and we'll take us now to Dovrefell National Park, another absolute jewel in the crown of Norwegian natural wonders. It's only 98 square miles, but do not be deceived by the size, because it includes two fascinating areas. There's marshland and moor to the east of the area, and to the west, more amazing mountains, steep and serrated, full of jagged majesty. But in Norway's southeastern area of land, east of the mountains around Ostfold, most of Telemark and Røros as well is dominated by valleys, excuse me, heading in a north-south direction in the eastern part, and then more of a northwest-southwest-east direction further west. And the valleys congregate around Oslofjord. And the longest of those extraordinary valleys are Osterdal and Godsprangdal. And this is part of Norway, which also contains large areas of lowland, again around the Oslofjord area. But now, because there's so much that I wanted to share with you, I'm going to move on to the western fields, which we know all about because we're there and we're visiting one of the jewels of the crown yesterday, weren't we? But these lands west of the mountains find their peaks becoming lower and lower toward the coast. And the largest of these western fields, Sognefjord, Hurrangane, and where we were yesterday, Geirangerfjord, which I think we'll all agree is pretty much ultimate field scenery, wasn't it? It's absolutely extraordinary. And the coast around that area, well, we were enjoying those skerries, weren't we, on the sail away yesterday, those islands running parallel to the coast and basically protecting the coast, really, along the 994 long mile route from Stavanger right up north where we're headed to North Cape. And the fields and most of the regions just generally run in a west-east direction. And but this Vesthallet region that I'm talking about, the western fields, surrounding the western fields as well, is usually one of the wettest regions in the whole of Europe. And on average, precipitation, if you add the rain and the snow together, 16 feet. It's quite an average. That's an average, by the way. But have you noticed, I'm sure wherever you come from, we don't have average precipitation anymore. The rain is a lot more than average most of the time, isn't it? But we won't get into that just yet. I think that'll be a few questions for later on, perhaps. But I did mention Sognefjord a moment ago. It just happens to be the second largest field in the world. Now, quick quiz question, ladies and gentlemen. Biggest field in the world? Well, the answer is Scoresby Sand, isn't it, in Greenland? But I'm sticking to Norway today. But Sognefjord, the largest in Norway, situated on the Sognefjorden region in western Norway, 45 miles north of Bergen. So we've been there. You know exactly what I'm talking about now. But the Sognefjord, it stretches 126 miles inland. It is one of the great sailing pleasures of Norway, when the weather is right, I hasten to add. But the field has a maximum depth of 4,300 feet below sea level. And that maximum depth is found actually some way inland, because towards the sea end, it actually rises up as a sill, and it is in places only 300 feet deep. So its depth is interesting in many ways. The average width of the main branch of Sognefjord is about 3 miles. So this is in every way a huge field. And the mountains immediately surrounding it, averaging 3,000 feet at their summits. So it really is extraordinary. Where we were, Geirangerfjord, it really is worth reminding ourselves of its true majesty. One day visit is just never enough, is it? There's always so much more to visit. It is 9 miles long. It's a branch, really, of the Stortfjord, or the Great Field, if we wanted to translate that. And at the head of the field, as we were yesterday, the beautiful village of Geirangerfjord. But Geirangerfjord is one of Norway's most visited tourist sites for obvious reasons. But it has international recognition because it's been on the UNESCO World Heritage Site along with its neighbouring Nærøyfjord since the year 2005. But that status is actually threatened by proposed plans to build power lines across the field. That's another debatable point which perhaps we could explore later. But Geirangerfjord is under constant threat. I don't know whether your guides actually told you that yesterday, because a local mountain called Akenset is actually threatening to fall into the field at any moment. Perhaps your guides mentioned that, yeah. And what would happen? It would create a most massive tsunami, which would wipe out Geiranger completely. Also, several other local villages, really within 10 minutes, only 10 minutes of Akenset actually falling into the sea. So what can you do in 10 minutes? I will leave that as an open question as well. But Geirangerfjord has loads of impressive waterfalls. If you weren't able to see it on this vacation visit, let me just whet your appetite for next time. The most beautiful, excuse me, let me just have a quick drink. This, by the way, is not my first martini of the afternoon, so I like to clarify that. Sorry about my voice. But if you weren't able to see the Seven Sisters, put it on your list for next time. The story surrounding it is beautiful, quite simply. On one side of the field, there is a waterfall called the Suter. On the other side, when the waterfalls are plunging, there are the Seven Sisters. And the Suter is meant to be wooing the Seven Sisters. It's a lovely story, but the waterfalls are extraordinary. Put it on your list for next time. But to the north of the western fields lies the Trondheim region, where more fascination awaits, with Trondheim, of course, being its as its regional capital. And the land here is far more gentle than what we've had. Rounded shapes of the mountains, with Trondheimsfjord being the star of the show, really. But moving further north again to the area around Nordland, Troms, and western Finnmark, once again dominated by jagged mountains, huge wonders of nature, and of course more fields, but in these northern fields they generally lie in the valleys lie in a west-east direction, but Saltfjellet, it is an exception. That actually lies in a north-south direction. So there's always surprise at every turn. But toward the far north-eastern region of Norway, the interior and the land east of North Cape, and of course that's where we're headed, isn't it? Around Finnmarksvidda and eastern Finnmark is actually less dominated by mountains, and is actually the average land is about 1,200 feet, so quite considerably lower than what we've encountered so far in this talk. And the interior in this part of Norway is actually dominated by the Finnmarksvidda plateau, and it's a large, wide area, but no shortage of fascination as well. Varangerfjord is one I just had to share with you. The valley going in an east-west direction. But if we go, I think we're heading into the above the Arctic Circle about 4 o'clock this afternoon, aren't we? So I need to tell you about one of the jewels in the crown of Norwegian natural wonders in the Arctic Ocean. That is the Svalbard archipelago. So many people say, oh, I don't want to go there because it's full of ice and snow. Prepare to be astonished, ladies and gentlemen, by what I'm about to tell you. Because, yes, of course, there are beautiful mountains. There are huge glaciers as well, particularly in the eastern part of Svalbard, where the land, 90% of the land is covered in glaciers. Ostfona is the largest glacier in the whole of Europe. I said that Jotunheimen is the biggest on continental Europe, but this is an offshore archipelago, so this really is an extraordinary sight to encounter. But despite its northerly and perhaps forbidding initial appearance, Svalbard really is full of surprise, because the Svalbard area actually consists of a group of islands within the Arctic Circle, way up north between 76 and 81 degrees north, and forms the northernmost part of Norway. And the northernmost part of Europe, really, the whole area is about 23,500 square miles, so that's a lot larger than many people assume, but 3 islands absolutely dominate this archipelago. There's Spitsbergen, 14,500 square miles, Northeastland of whisker over 5,500 square miles, and Edge Island just a shade less than 2,000 2,000 square miles alone. Now, I have to tell you about the events of the 21st of February 2008, because that was the largest recorded earthquake in Norwegian history. It was no small affair, measuring 6.2 on the Richter scale. The epicenter was in Storfjorden, and that really was a big disruptive event. But in addition to the humans living up there, there are 4 other mammal species which inhabit the Svalbard archipelago. There's the Svalbard field mouse, there is the beautiful Arctic fox, the Svalbard reindeer, and yes, I'm talking about a distinctive subspecies of wild reindeer, and ladies and gentlemen, there are polar bears too. And since polar bears are pretty common in the Svalbard area, local people have to be prepared for the worst when they venture out of their settlements. That means carrying a rifle, of course. But Norwegian law is very fair with polar bears. You can't just go out and shoot one for the fun of it, because that is just against everything that the Norwegian conservation management stands for. Only if there is a threat to life can you use the weapon. But there, equally in the seas, if you are able to vacation up there, the aquatic mammal species are extraordinary. There are whales, there are dolphins too. People are surprised to see dolphins so far north. There are seals and there are walruses. And there are fascinating seabirds up there as well, brunixes and black guillemot. There are puffins up there, little auk fulmar, black-legged kittiwake also. But other seabirds which include the Arctic tern. There are 4 species of skua and the ever-elusive and the rare, sadly, ivory gull. But the one I need to pick out for particular mention is the Svalbard Ptarmigan, which is found on the larger islands. It is the only bird which stays in the Svalbard archipelago the entire year. These guys have to be tough, don't they? But another surprise for you. 2 songbirds actually migrate up to Svalbard, the snow bunting and the wheat ear. But in terms of flowering plants, Svalbard is really in a league of its own for astonishing surprises, because I've already painted the picture of ice and mountains and snow. Could you believe 164 different species of vascular plant just within the Svalbard archipelago? Now, when I come out with phrases like vascular plant, what on earth am I talking about? Vascular plants are special types of plants that have their own different types of tissues for conducting water, minerals and photosynthetic products through the plant. But 164 different species of those plants. And by the way, vascular plants, it doesn't include the algae, the mosses and the lichens, which are non-vascular. So 164 different species up there. You're going to have to go up there at some stage, aren't you? It's too fascinating to miss out. They will grow no more than 4 inches tall, and of course they will grow in just the sheltered spots. But if you can come across carpets of blossoms like this, it's just irresistible, isn't it? But while I'm talking about plant-related issues on Svalbard, I need to tell you about the seed bank which is up there. And basically what the Norwegian government has done is to build this doomsday seed bank, really. It's an important building to store seeds from as many of the world's crop varieties as possible. And also, interestingly, their botanical wild relatives as well. And the Svalbard seed bank has been basically hollowed out into a long tube, we can really think about it, 360 feet into the mountains in a tunnel in Spitsbergen, cut into the rock. The natural temperature is -6. But the engineers have taken that down to -18 Celsius. The last time I was looking, it has about 1,400 different seed groups. So it is very, very important. Coming from seed laboratories and stores around the world. It has 2 blast-proof doors and 2 airlocks as well. But the number of seeds depends on the murky waters of politics, who's going to get involved, who doesn't want to play ball, or all the rest of it. And basically, it's an insurance against any type of global catastrophe, natural or human-made. And there are various fields along the Svalbard Islands, just adding to the list of reasons why we just need to go there whenever we can. Winderfjord, 67 miles long. This one of my favourites, Eastern Fjord, 66 miles long. Van Jemen Fjord, 50 miles long. So many reasons to go to Svalbard if you can. And for the sake of completeness more than anything else, I need to take you halfway between Norway and Greenland just to briefly mention Jan Mayen, because that is where Berenberg is found, and that is the only volcano within Norwegian territory. But today I'm sticking with the bigger islands like Svalbard and the mainland, because I only have 45 minutes to talk about these things. If we return to mainland Norway, again, I'm sure by now you'll have realised that with so much natural variety, astonishing variety of flora and fauna, Norway has perhaps a surprisingly temperate climate for being such a northerly nation. And this is mainly due to the North Atlantic current, again, a source of question for many cruise guests, so I'll anticipate those now with a briefer explanation. And the Norwegian current basically is a warming air current, prevailing from southwesterlies and bringing mild air on shore. And so we can think about it as the North Atlantic current, as it is sometimes called. The North Atlantic drift is exactly the same thing, only a different name for it. And the North Atlantic sea movement, different names for precisely the same phenomenon. So don't get confused by thinking they're all subtle differences. They're not. They're the same thing. And basically, it's a warm ocean current that helps to create beautiful pastoral landscapes, just like the one I'm showing you on my slide. And one branch of this, the Gulf Stream, as it comes across the Atlantic, which goes down to the Canary Islands, that heads on south, and the rest just carries on right up to the north. It divides and subdivides and really does produce some extraordinary surprises within Norway. But within this very favourable mix, basically, of warmth and wet, that's the bottom line of what the Gulf Stream does for Norway. You won't be surprised when I tell you that Norway has an astonishing range of natural plant species. And I assembled this summary slide, which I hope will be helpful. The good news is that within Norway, 2,630 different species of plant. Now that is surprise number one, isn't it? Most people would not have thought that Norway alone just has so many. Unfortunately, of course, there's bad news with conservation these days. 210 out of that list is on the endangered list. And 13 species you will not find anywhere else in the world. So what sort of plants am I talking about there? I'm talking about the algae, the lichens, and the mosses, basically. But endlessly fascinating. They should not be ignored. But while I'm looking at this slide, let me just tell you a little bit more about those plants which I've summarised there as Western plants. But what do I mean by Western plants? Well, in this context, they need a lot more moisture than other plants in Norway. That's basically. So they have a very low tolerance to winter frosts. That's another characteristic. And with those two factors in mind, we can think about those Western plants being along the southwestern coast. That's where we'd mainly find them, in the mild and wet conditions that we would find out there. So I'm talking about Norway's holly. Bell heather is also on that list as well. But along these western coast of Norway, it's just full of surprises, because who on earth would have thought you can find palm trees in Norway? It sounds like something out of Monty Python's Flying Circus, doesn't it? I had to show you the picture because many of you wouldn't have believed me, but I'm not making this up. Palm trees in Norway. We can only explain it by the Gulf Stream, can't we? And if you think that's bizarre, how about the Lebanese cedar tree, which is still growing in the town called Stavanger? And you'll find chestnut trees growing in sheltered valleys, even within the Arctic Circle, ladies and gentlemen. All because, how can we explain it? It's down to the warming effect of the Gulf Stream, isn't it? And the North Atlantic drift. But now I just want to finish up with my summary slide. I want to tell you a little bit more about the eastern plants that I've got summarised there as the final bullet point there. The distinguishing thing about those eastern plants is they definitely need their summer sunshine, just like many of us, ladies and gentlemen. But also they need a lot less moisture than their counterparts on Norway's west coast. At the same time, that they definitely have to be fairly tolerant of cold winters as well. So what sort of plants am I talking about? Well, some of the most beautiful. Daphne mesoreum definitely is on that list. Spiked speedwell is on that list as well. And in the sheltered valleys, you will find European ash, and dog's mercury, which is another woodland plant, is also up there. And we definitely need to think about alpine wildflowers. I devoted an entire lecture yesterday to that. If you weren't able to come along, no problem at all. It's already waiting for you on your stateroom TV. So I'm not going to repeat anything about the alpine wildflowers from yesterday. Well, basically, just to say that they take every advantage of Norway's Gulf Stream as well. One of the interesting things about, again, a question that I often get asked, is a region in the south of Norway called the Nemeril. And I'm often asked about that. The Nemeril is interesting. It's confined to the areas in the southern Norway which are lower than 450 feet above sea level. And the Nemeril plants are basically also restricted to valleys as well, and they go inland no more than 30 miles. So it's a fascinating area. It is important because it's part of Norway's natural wonders, so we need to know about it, but it is restricted. What sort of plants are we going to see? Well, of course, the European oak definitely is on there. The grey alder as well. But in the northern part of the Nemeril zone, we find an area which we definitely need to know about, which is about 12% of the entire nation's area. And that is dominated by Norway's spruce, Norwegian spruce, and a few species of European ash. Oak you'll find also there as well. But these areas are very, very important from a commercial point of view, but they're also stunningly beautiful as well for all us who focus on vacation pursuits too. But we're moving into some very tall mountains as we go north. The silver birch is up there too. And again, I've had questions from cruise guests as they were coming in and asking about the other plants or trees that you would find in around this area. Pine, aspen, rowan, bird cherry is on the list, and grey alder in these northern areas. But the genetics of the birch trees are interesting because they are basically a cross between the silver birch and the downy birch. So it's a very rare species. Also, it's actually the largest species of birch tree than you would find elsewhere in Norway or elsewhere, full stop, really. But now, let us be brave, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start focusing on the areas that we are headed towards the north of Norway. And you might read about these northern areas of Norway under various headings. The North Subarctic is one, or the North Boreal. But I prefer to think about it as the south of Norway's polar region. We're not quite into the polar region, but we're in the south. That's where I've taken you now. So it won't surprise you when I tell you that there are some very harsh weather conditions up where we're taken just to the south of the polar region. Average summer temperatures, I emphasize, 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit if you're lucky. And the chilly summers really only go on for about 2 months. The rest is very much more grim and grey than that. So up there, the trees are very small indeed, growing no more than about 6 to 12 feet tall. But this is an important part of the nation because it covers about a third of the entire area of Norway. And if we go down to the coast in this sub-polar area, we will find a lot of mountain birch there. If we were to drive inland in this northerly area, we would find all sorts of conifers as well, spruce and pine being on that list. But now, let us be brave, really brave. let's venture into the most northern parts of Norway. And we are headed there, aren't we, to the tundra zone. Endlessly fascinating. Don't be put off by the weather. We need to go there and we need to explore, don't we? And as you can see on my slide, initially, yes, I grant you, it does look fairly bleak, doesn't it? But there's amazing wild beauty if we just tune our eyes into what we are really seeing. So if we have a chance to explore on the shore excursions, then my advice is to take those opportunities. But right up in the tundra region, there are very, very few trees, and those trees that are up there are bent over by the punishing winds. And again, trees will only grow between 6 to 12 feet maximum due to the conditions. But please never underestimate the importance of the Norwegian tundra, because in all it actually represents another 1/3 of the entire nation. So that's a good reason why we need to know about it, isn't it? It's important for us to know, and also the amazing surprises, because who on earth would have thought so far north you'd find blueberries growing? Why is this? Again, it gets down to the warming effect of the Gulf Stream. It's amazing, isn't it? What you find up there. Juniper and twinflower are also growing that far north, simply due to the Gulf Stream and its influence. And the more you drive into the northerly tundra region, the more you'll find patches of lichen. And a lot of people say, oh, lichen, Adrian, they're a bit boring, but they are completely amazing. Because when I tell you that lichen are like no other plants, they are actually composite plants. Did you know that? And they are a composite of a type of fungus and a type of algae. And they have grown to live in extraordinary harmony. So when we spend time studying lichens, they really are truly extraordinary plants. It just shows how the fungus and the algae are able to get along just fine. But before I move on, we are just as likely to find lichens in the freezing cold of Norway's tundra as we are to find lichens growing in the baking hot deserts of the Sahara Desert, Africa's Sahara Desert. So any plant that is adaptable for those two conditions and many more in between has to be worth a bit of study. So if you see a lichen, just take some time to marvel at its shape. So that's another reason why we need to venture into the tundra to explore these surprises. Another amazing surprise as well is the Glacier buttercup. It amazes me because it's such a delicate-looking plant, and yet it is able to survive in such an environment of blasting winds. How can it do that? Well, it only ever grows in very sheltered spots as well. So yes, it can survive in northern Norway, but on other vacations you will find again a Glacier buttercup in Iceland, Faroe Islands, the European Alps, the Pyrenees, which are located between France and Spain. The Carpathian Mountains also have their Glacier buttercups, and of course everyone here from California will recognize it from your mountain hikes in the Sierra Nevada. So it gets around, it is extraordinary, it is adaptable. So I've shown you so much of the natural wonders of Norway, and it probably won't surprise you now when I tell you that some of the great modern writers have been inspired by the landscapes and the wildlife that I have been telling you about. Edgar Allan Poe, for example, was really inspired by the landscapes of Mox Trauman and one of the great whirlpools of Norway, Jules Verne, was also inspired by Mox Trauman in his book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Many of us will have read that in our childhood and teenage years. But we can dig back into Norse legend, and those too have been captivated and inspired by the natural wonders of Norway. We can see on this recreation of an ancient map there, but the current within this whirlpool of Monk's Trauman goes at 25 miles an hour. It makes Monk's Trauman the most powerful whirlpool in the world. And of course, like all whirlpools, it's caused by the ocean tides moving through a very confined space. But while I'm talking about Norwegian whirlpools as well, let me just show you the Saltstraumen as well. Again, extraordinary currents. You would not want to go swimming something there, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you that. 400 million cubic yards of seawater get forced between the 450 feet wide passageway every 6 hours. If you're able to go there, you just marvel at how treacherous the waters are. Now, I know, ladies and gentlemen, we've only had 45 minutes together, but I very much hope that I have whetted your appetite to learn more and to visit Norway more. There's way too much for just one vacation. You're going to have to come back again, aren't you? For me, though, it's been an absolute pleasure to share all these natural wonders with you, and I really appreciate the time that you've given me this afternoon. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.